So we now start obviously with our guests in the studio. We have Mr. Mark Tarabella, who's member of the Agriculture Committee and this Development Committee as well, and Mr. GOERENS, who's also a member of the Development Committee. We will hear from our guests later on, but I need now to give you some practical information. So this panel is available in English and French with simultaneous translations, and the audience can interact with us through Slido. So here, listen very well, you can go to the Slido website and enter the code ED21, ED written like this, EDD21. Then you will see you can immediately choose a channel, so pick the yellow one, which is the channel number 4. The panel is divided in 2 parts. So in the first session, we'll discuss how to provide nutritious food in a sustainable way. And in the second part, we'll look at some local answers from the local indigenous communities. So there are some leader women who are paving the way to a new form of agriculture and women empowerment. So I remind you, if you want to ask your questions, you can go to Slido, enter the code ED21 and then choose channel number 4. So you will see also there is the question and answer section where you can ask your questions to our panelists. So in a few seconds, you'll see the first 3 questions, and you can take your time to answer while I give the floor to my guest here in the studio, Mr. Mark Tarabella.
Thank you so much, and to allow you to switch to the right channel, as you mentioned, I would like to switch French and inform you of that. Et donc, dire peut-être rebondir sur le propos introductif et dire qu'effectivement, on fait déjà beaucoup en matière d'aide au développement, et notamment l'Union européenne, plus les États membres, qui ont chacune une politique de développement, qui représentent ensemble le premier donateur mondial. Mais il y a aussi les organisations internationales, la FAO, qui s'exprimera dans quelques instants par la voix de Madame Jocelyn. Mais il y a aussi des donateurs privés, des ONG. Et pourtant, près de 10% de la population mondiale ne mange toujours pas à sa faim et souffre de malnutrition et de sous-nutrition. Et les chiffres tantôt diminuent, tantôt réaugmentent, et le constat est toujours le même. Et en fait, la pandémie a exacerbé les inégalités sociales et par conséquent a aggravé la vulnérabilité de nos systèmes alimentaires. Et de ce fait, 130 millions de personnes supplémentaires, essentiellement dans les pays les plus pauvres, devraient souffrir de famine, en plus des 690 millions de personnes qui sont déjà mal nourries dans le monde. Ça fera à nouveau plus de 800 millions de personnes. Et depuis ma plus tendre enfance, j'ai toujours entendu parler de famine. La première qui me frappa, c'est celle du Sahel. Et c'était dans les années 70. Et donc, les famines et les crises alimentaires à répétition. Et surtout, sur tous les continents, et notamment enfin, le continent africain, évidemment, le continent asiatique. Et je me demande dès lors pourquoi on n'arrive toujours pas à trouver une solution durable, malgré les moyens et les travaux qui sont faits et entrepris, et les efforts. On n'arrive pas à trouver une solution à ce grand problème. Est-ce lié parfois à la mal gouvernance, à une agriculture mal adaptée selon certaines régions, ou encore maintenant au réchauffement climatique qui ne fait qu'aggraver les choses? Et donc, quelles seraient donc, selon vous, les pistes afin de se rapprocher de l'objectif numéro 2 des objectifs de développement durable, qui consisterait en l'éradication de la faim et la malnutrition d'ici 2030.
So thank you so much, and now let's have a look at your Slido answers. So I can see that most of you are reaching out from Europe, and most of you want to learn about new practices and sustainable practices. So there is also a question about the impact of food production on climate change. We can see that the agriculture alone is directly responsible for 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions. It's huge. The food production in total is responsible for 1/3 of the global emissions. So now taking point of Mr. Tarabella and talking about famine, we have the opportunity to talk about food security with somebody who knows the issue very well. I'm referring to our guest, Mrs. Jocelyn Brown-Hall, who's the director of the liaison office of FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization in Washington. Jocelyn, thanks so much for joining us from Washington.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, and we have maybe a problem. No, it's okay. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Yes, today is my first day in my new role as the director of FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization's office in Washington. But yesterday, I was the deputy regional representative for Africa, and I spent 2.5 years there in Ghana. So I do have a fundamental and ground experience in Africa. There has never been more of an urgent need on food security and conservation, especially in Africa, where we know that hunger is on the rise, driven by climate variabilities, conflict, and extremes, and of course, COVID-19. Our organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, works directly with partners such as the EU, as well as communities to promote better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. These really have to be wrapped together. It's a holistic approach that our Director General has to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Sustainable Development Goal 1 and 2, to eradicate hunger and poverty. There are about 33 million people in Africa who identify as indigenous. I do want to note that research has found that indigenous foods are particularly nutritious and climate resilient. We have several in Africa, whether it's baobab, moringa, tamarind, that are indigenous to Africa that could bring essential vitamins to the communities here who suffer not only from lack of available food, but lack of available nutritious and healthy food. In 2010, our organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, adopted a policy on indigenous and tribal peoples to ensure that the organization takes into full consideration and promotes indigenous issues around food security, sustainable land use, and other relevant work. So we are really committed to working with indigenous communities. And I also want to note that if indigenous communities were its own country, if they were collected around the world to be its own country, they would be the 4th largest country in the world. So this work with them is really important to ensure that we, thank you. In 2014, we've implemented other partnership programs with the European Union. Of note, I wanted to talk about our Sustainable Wildlife Management Program, and also our Action Against Desertification. We are working with Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, the Gambia, Niger, Nigeria, and Senegal, and our Sustainable Wildlife Management Program is working in 13 African countries. So we have really a broad reach in this area. We know it's important, and we're doing our best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thanks so much for reminding us about the important work that big international organizations do. And now talking about big organizations, in Africa, WWF is one of the most active in nature conservation and biodiversity. So Mrs. Nachilala NKOMBO is the director of WWF in Zambia, and she's with us. I invite the audience to pose questions to Jocelyn and to Mrs. NKOMBO on Slido. So, Mrs. NKOMBO, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor and privilege for WWF to be part of this very important high-level panel that's looking at how we can think together in terms of really building a food secure and nutrition secure system that works for Africa. As you know, the WWF is the world's largest conservation organization.
We have a problem with the audio. Okay. Yes, maybe if you can adjust your microphone. And if...
Is this better?
It's much better now. And you can repeat, maybe restart.
Is this better?
Yes, yes, this is much better. We've lost your maybe last sentence.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you repeat the last sentence, maybe? If we have a problem of a connection with Mrs. NKOMBO, yes, we can see you now. Maybe we can fix.
Okay, can I continue? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can I continue?
Yes. Maybe if you can adjust your camera as well to.
Is this better?
No, maybe you should turn it towards you. Can you see? We can see only half of your face. Yeah, perfect. Okay, fantastic.
Okay.
Now, WWF is very active. It's focused on biodiversity protection.
Correct. So we work with governments, we work with civil society, and we work with communities directly to stop the degradation of the natural environment, because we believe our food systems, our livelihoods, and our economies at large depend on a healthy natural world. As you know, currently our dominant food system, we believe as WWF, has failed nature and humanity. We know that globally 700 million people go to bed without food to eat, and 2 million people are obese. The majority of the hungry people, as noted by FAO, are in Africa, meaning the current food system is failing Africa, and urgent need for change must come from within Africa. As you all know, our current food system is failing because it's leading to massive degradation of the natural environment and overuse of freshwater system and loss of biodiversity. The number of hungry people that are supposed to increase, there's going to be more hungry people that are going to increase due to climate change and COVID-19. So
sorry to interrupt you, because you're saying very important things, but we don't want to be distracted by your camera moving. So if you can find a way to fix it, maybe, yes, a bit. You should try to focus on your whole face. Now we can see only a part. Yes, this is good. Maybe try to fix it.
Okay, so what I'm seeing here, I can see my face.
Yes, this is good.
So it's a bit of a
this is perfect.
A challenge. Yeah.
We really want to focus on what you say and not to the wobbly camera. Otherwise, it's a bit distracting. So please go ahead.
Correct. So I was saying the current food system is failing people and nature. On the natural side, it has led to massive degradation of land. It has led to the overuse of our freshwater systems and also massive loss of biodiversity. As WWF, we work closely with communities who are heavily impacted by nature loss and climate change, and we try and work to galvanize that urgency for them to help protect nature, restore nature while producing food sustainably. When you look at the rate of nature loss globally, we believe that the very foundation for food production is under compromise, and we believe that there's an urgent need or imperative for change. So we believe the food system is a unique opportunity to define what policies and investments in future could create what we refer to as a nature-positive food system, one that ensures food production for the growing global population, but within the limits of what nature provides. We would like to work toward a food system that limits the pollution of water and land and replenishes biodiversity and ensures that the core ecosystem functions that support food production that are currently under threat are actually secure, to ensure not only food security now, but intergenerational food security, meaning our children should still have the means for them to produce food. So what this means is that we require radical change to our dominant agricultural practices that ensures that the natural systems retain their ability to produce. Our work with smallholder farmers who live around protected areas has focused on promoting what we refer to as nature-positive production, which really promotes agroecological principles. We're working in two parts of Zambia where I currently work. where we're supporting more than 6,500 farmers who are implementing a suite of policies that have enabled them not only to have food security, but also achieve nutrition security, but build the resilience that is needed for them to be able to weather the impacts of climate change. So we've emphasized on putting the food system in the hands of communities, making sure that women farmers and young people are supported. Unlike the current food policies we have at the national level that are biased towards export production or biased towards single food items, we have really been encouraging the communities that we work with to produce food on the basis of the strengths of the landscape. So, for example, much as the focus of the government policy is on maize producers, a number of the farmers we work with are producing a range of food without really using artificial fertilizers and pesticides, but really using their traditional and indigenous knowledge in terms of how they ensure that they harness the land without really damaging it, but at the same time have the tools to fight climate change.
Mrs. NKOMBO, thanks so much for touching these very important points. I think what you just said is also answering one of the questions that we got from Slido, and I will give you the screen back once we see more questions so that you can also answer to our audience. So the first question is, can development cooperation make a real difference in transforming ecological models in developing countries? I think you you gave a very important answer already. Maybe I would turn these questions now to Jocelyn. Jocelyn.
Absolutely. The development community and development cooperation can make a difference. It's happening now with our situation all over Africa, where partners are working with local NGOs, with the United Nations, to determine what are the specific local and indigenous practices, specifically focusing on women and youth to engender work in this area. So, and as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of indigenous products made here in Africa that are singular to Africa that could really revolutionize some nutritious foods worldwide. I mentioned baobab, moringa, and tamarind, which are all high and rich in vitamins and indigenous to Africa, can only be found here.
Sorry if I interrupt you. Is it correct? Did you define these the so-called indigenous superfoods? So we can answer also another question from Slido.
Sure, I would. That's what I would consider them to be. And in fact, the G7 2 days ago were visiting the Eden Project, and they in the United Kingdom, and they have been on the forefront of trying to promote baobab outside of Africa as a superfood. That, in fact, baobab, for example, can bring vitamin C. If you put a little powder on your food, you can boost your vitamin C. So there's, we only are touching the surface of these indigenous superfoods, and with the rich biodiversity, specifically in Africa and in Latin America and the Amazon, I think that there's a world of nutritious foods out there that we need to work with indigenous farmers to find out.
Yes, thank you very much. And now we have another question from Slido. What support can local farmer communities get to make a decent living that is sustainable for them and nature? Maybe Nachilala, you can answer to this question.
Sure. So based on the WWF experience, as mentioned earlier, we really try to support diversified but sustainable and nature-positive production, and really focusing on everything that a landscape can provide. So, for example, we support the entrenchment of sustainable agriculture practices, but also linking up farmers to markets, including high-value markets that can produce that can buy some of the organic foods locally. We're working with a company called Essential Commodities that supports these farmers that are into horticulture they are producing their maize, their millet, but also are involved in forest-related livelihoods. So basically, they produce honey, and there's a market that is there. So I think it's critically important that the training bit in terms of sustainable nature-based enterprises is actually elevated so that communities can derive benefits from nature, not only depend on crop production. They can look at other means and alternatives to support themselves. If they have more than one income stream, it improves the capacity of the household to even buy food when they have not been able to produce food at the household level. It's also critical for farmers to have a level of control on their inputs. And so really, the conservation agriculture practices have been very key, because instead of buying fertilizer, for example, they've been able to recycle some of the stuff that they have. So for example, the liquid manure, they've been able to also use manures from tea, and then instead of spending money on usually very expensive inorganic fertilizers and pesticides, they've found a way of using natural science, natural knowledge for them to be able to deal with some of the threats to their own production.
Thank you. What Mrs. NKOMBO said, Ms. Tarabella, is something that reminds us a little bit of our farm to fork strategy. And here there is a question for you on Slido. So could you imagine an African version of the farm to fork strategy?
Bien évidemment, je crois que c'est au cœur du sujet. Je pense que l'agriculture doit d'abord être considérée comme devant nourrir les personnes là où elles se trouvent. Le commerce vient après. Alors très souvent, on a peut-être, j'en parlerai sans doute tout à l'heure, mais si j'ai l'occasion, parfois certaines incohérences entre nos politiques, ou en tout cas on essaye de les mettre côte à côte. Il faudrait peut-être apporter plus de cohérence de manière à ce que justement l'agriculture, et je ne nie pas le commerce, c'est Edgar Pisani qui en parlait déjà il y a très très longtemps, où il faudrait des mini-organisations commerciales par sous-région du monde, oui. Et que peut-être, grâce à l'agriculture d'abord de subsistance, mais qui doit se développer aussi pour devenir un sujet de production qui économiquement peuvent être profitables aux régions là où elles se passent, de manière à échanger des denrées alimentaires qu'on produit d'un côté et pas de l'autre. Mais aujourd'hui, force est de constater que ce qu'on essaye de faire au niveau européen, il faudrait pouvoir le faire au niveau mondial, notamment dans les pays les moins avancés, pour que l'agriculture soit reconsidérée comme une activité qui est primordiale dans toutes les sociétés, en ne niant pas les échanges et leur, je dirais, et leur pertinence, mais c'est d'abord nourrir les gens. Moi, je mets toujours c'est l'accès à la nourriture, et puis il y a l'eau potable aussi, c'est un autre sujet, mais c'est clair que c'est une stratégie qui doit être intéressante, adaptable partout.
Thank you. So I want to thank you now, our speakers, for this first round of discussion, and ask them to stay, because we are now entering in our second session on local and indigenous solutions to combine food security with sustainable production. I remind you to use Slido to pose your questions, and don't miss the opportunity also to reply to our polls. We have two very inspirational women who are about to talk about sustainable agriculture projects in Kenya and Chad. But before hearing their accounts, I would like to give the floor to my guest here in the studio, Mr. GOERENS, who can tell us what the European Parliament is doing in this field. Thanks so much.
Oui, bonjour à tout le monde. Je suis heureux de pouvoir renouer avec une tradition bien établie des journées européennes pour le développement. Mon propos est le suivant. Nous sommes à un moment particulièrement important, et je crois que cette discussion tombe très bien parce que nous avons à engager la programmation pour les 7 années futures. Et l'agriculture prendra une place importante dans la programmation de la Commission. Pour ceux qui ne sont pas familiers avec la pratique européenne, la politique européenne, je dirais que l'Union européenne planifie sur une période de 7 années, et nous sommes en train d'engager le dialogue géopolitique avec la Commission. En ce qui concerne l'agriculture, nous avons peu de leçons à donner mais par contre des enseignements à partager. En Europe, comme dans les pays en développement, l'un des grands problèmes, c'est l'accès aux terres. Les raisons pour refuser l'accès aux terres aux paysans sont très différentes, mais elles sont pratiquement une constante sur toute la planète. Il y a une pratique irresponsable qui consiste à enlever ou à empêcher que les paysans puissent avoir accès aux terres, le land grabbing. J'aimerais vous entendre dire ce que vous pensez à ce propos. Si des politiques sont possibles, on ne peut rien vous imposer, mais dans vos États, vous avez deux acteurs centraux, le ministre des Finances, le ministre de l'Agriculture, et j'ajouterai la science, et aussi ceux qui s'occupent du droit. Parce que le droit de la personne est très étroitement lié à l'accès au terrain. Ça, c'est un premier problème où j'aimerais entendre votre avis. Le deuxième problème concerne l'accès au crédit. Vous savez que l'agriculture a des cycles de production relativement longs. On sème au printemps, on récolte en automne. Les décisions sont toujours prises avec un horizon de 6 mois pour ce qui concerne le cycle annuel et d'une génération pour ce qui concerne la projection sur l'avenir. Alors, mon propos est le suivant. Dans l'industrie, si vous avez un capital, mettons, de 100, vous avez un retour sur investissement de 400. C'est à peu près ça. Si en agriculture, vous engagez un capital de 100, sur une année, vous avez un retour sur investissement de 50. Donc, il y a une différence énorme. L'exemple peut paraître caricatural, mais il y a une différence énorme entre l'argent investi dans l'agriculture et l'industrie. Et c'est une des raisons pour lesquelles l'agriculture dans les pays en développement se développe très lentement, pour la simple raison que l'accès au crédit, qui est indispensable pour financer des moyens de production nouveaux, pour accroître la productivité, manque partout. Ce qui explique aussi qu'il y a des paysans même qui sont mal nourris et qui sont parfois victimes de famine. Voilà, j'aimerais vous entendre parler sur cela. Bien entendu, dans la discussion qui suivra, on pourra aussi voir quel est le rôle de l'Union européenne. Je vous dis dès à présent, le rôle de l'Union européenne est un rôle d'accompagnateur, de partenariat. Nous ne pouvons rien et nous ne voulons rien vous imposer. Cette époque est heureusement révolue. Alors c'est à vous de vous manifester. Je vous écouterai avec intérêt.
Mr. Goerens, thanks so much for all these inputs. And now let's have a look at Slido, where we asked our audience to reflect on some very impressive numbers. So as Mr. Goerens highlighted, some farmers are malnourished themselves. So it is important to know that almost 80% of food globally produced is produced by small farmers who provide for their own nutrition. And it seems also that we are not champions of variety, considering that 75% of food produced comes from 12 plants and 5 animal species. So most of the farmers in the world are obviously women, and they grow about 70% of the food in most developing nations. But only 15% of them are landowners. So you got some of these percentages in the poll that we launched on Slido, and these allows me to introduce the next guest, because as you can see, women must be part of the solution. So I turn now to Mrs. Hindou OUMAROU IBRAHIM, President of the Association for Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad. She's also a UN Sustainable Development Goal advocate, and she allowed me to define her in one word: an eco-feminist. Mrs. Ibrahim, thanks so much for joining us. Among the many projects you are leading, there are 2 that captured my attention. One is about mapping natural resources, and the other one is about women empowerment. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Zen, and it's so nice to be with all of you here, and especially in this time of crisis, talking about food system and indigenous peoples. Of course, firstly, I want all of you understand one thing. Indigenous peoples do not use food insecurity. We use food sovereignty. The reason is, as in my community, Mororo pastoralists, we are named after our cattle. So food, it is also part of our identity. Secondly, when we talk about food as indigenous peoples, and especially when I'm coming from the Sahel and Chad, so food is also linked with our nature, environment, the ecosystem that we live and grow up on in. And to come back to your questions, the two examples, so how we are managing better the natural resources in order to mitigate the conflict, and of course, as the commissioner said, to also give the land to the women. So the first example is through the participatory mapping that I did in my community, in my organization. You know, peoples depend from the land, and land territories and resources are always under the governance of the government. And in each constitution, you can see the land territories resources are belong to the government. Who are managing? They are the indigenous communities who are living independent of me. And for more than 70% of the people that are living independent from this land. So that's where it's come the customary land use. And then it is not clearly defined all the land tenure, and this is the one with the climate change impact and biodiversity laws. It's creating a conflict between the communities, fighting each other to get access to the fertile land. So to mitigate all this conflict, we use this 3D or 2D participatory mapping, and that helped to put together science knowledge coming from geographical information, technology, and the traditional knowledge of the indigenous peoples. It helps us to build the map where we engage man and woman all together and use an elders to make the intergenerational exchange. It is help the community to redefine the corridor of movement of cattle, point of the station where they can access the water and stay 2-3 days, and the agriculture area. So that helped to mitigate the conflict and make the communities live in harmony, because we all know in our communities, we already net zero agriculture production thanks to our movement of cattle. So the cow should fertile the land, and when we move, this land become again more and more fertile for the pastoralists and at the same time for the farmers. So then this help to mitigate the conflict, to restore their nature, and help the communities to put them knowledge, even they do not have a pig.
Thank you.
Examples that you come on in. I'm so excited because we start this project with UNESCO around the natural park, we call it it's an NKOMBO National Park between Chad and Cameroon. As you know, if we wanted to have a biosphere reserve, we need to maintain the ecosystem of this national park. So to do so, of course, to come also to the commissioner question earlier, where is the land right to the women? So in this project, we already select the women who are living around the place, from the indigenous communities who are a pastoralist, and the local communities who are the farmers living around the place. So we start doing the lobby from the national authorities to the government, to the governor of the regions, to the mayors, to all the community chiefs, to say if you give the land to the women. How
was the response of the women who received this land, in which they, as I understood, they planted a tree, and then from this tree and from this piece of land they produce also their vegetables?
Yes, I'm coming to that. So firstly, the first process that we did, it's making a lobby to get access to the land for those women first. And it is not the woman who decides, because it is the man. That's why we pass through all the different local authorities to the community chiefs. And when we got the land, so each woman get a piece of the land. And in the piece of the land, they have to do the agroecology. But for us, the agroecology, it means each woman must plant certain numbers of the trees, coming from the indigenous trees, where we cannot lose the ecosystem. And under the trees, they can plant a seasonal crops. During the rain season, they can plant millet, maize, beans, etc. And after the rain season, we put a motor pump who can give them more water, and then they can plant vegetables. So you see how we can combine income revenue for the women, land right, decisions over the land and territories and resources, and restoration of the ecosystem around the place that they are living. So those are the two examples we are sharing. But however, we cannot talk about the food system in indigenous communities if we do not respect the rights of those communities and give them back access to the land and resources, because we do have our traditional knowledge to use it. This sustains our communities. Even with all the climate change biodiversity laws, we are resilient because we are using our traditional knowledge. And it is time that the northern countries learn from what we are doing. We are the experts and we are the engineers of the land. So that's why it's changing. It is not always that the developed countries invest on us. But no, you can learn from how we are managing sustainably the land and take it in your own. Because the agriculture in developed countries are representing 15 to 20% of all the global emission. Our agriculture is zero net emission. So
Thank you so much for this information, and I think you also have answered to Mr. GOERENS' questions. So, Mrs. Ibrahim, thanks so much for your insights, and your struggle seems not too different from the one of our next guest, Mrs. Sherine OMONDI, Program Manager Coordinator at K Summit in Kenya. Sherine is a young African leader who has shared her own experience of using the family land to pay for her studies with other people in her community. Sherine, thanks so much for being with us. You saw many opportunities in farming throughout the whole year that were not so obvious. So could you tell us more about the good practices your organization is implementing? The screen is yours.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I would really love to appreciate the fact that young leaders have been given the opportunity to, have a representative and their voices being heard in such panels. As a young woman, I have grown up in a farm where my parents have been able to lease land from different farmers and plant different crops that were used to pay for my school fees up to the university level. So after I cleared my university, I found that it was important that as young people we needed to come together and mobilize each other and our ideas and work on something, especially when it comes to matters agriculture. So we started with planting trees, but we thought that it would be wise if we incorporate biodiversity so that it could help, in matters helping the nutrients in these particular farms. So during also this process, we've been able to, have a conversation with local government leaders where we've been able to pitch policies that should be taken care of with the young people and have representation. So what we do at K Summit Community-Based Organization is we train farmers on crop rotation, because we are used to to planting maize and beans. That after rainy seasons, then the farm remains vacant, where now nothing is planted. So during these sessions, we train farmers on different crops that they can do. However, we've been having a few challenges, especially with testing the soil. And we're looking forward, of course, to having portable soil testing machines where we are able to, test the soil as we try to, capacity build with the farmers. We've also been able to have conversation with the farmers and, teach them on the importance of participating in rural conversation where we have public participation for the people, especially when there is budget conversation, and we've taught them on ways in which they can get small loans from the local government. One of the loans that we've benefited from is the national government affirmative action fund that is given from the Office of the Women Representative. One of our programs this year was to have a conversation with women who do not own land and their husbands own land. So we gave them an idea and we distributed millet seeds, and we encouraged them to go to their houses, back into their houses, and have this conversation with their husbands. And have this conversation and tell them that we've brought this and this is what we have. We've also had, during these capacity buildings, we've had young people who've said, we do not want to, just plant, but we also want to use this small piece of land in ensuring that we take over other spaces in agriculture. We have 3 of our young people. One of them is, doing poultry and doing very good sales. We have young people.
If I can interrupt you now, you said something very important about young people in your community. They tend to sell their lands to buy things they need or to pay for their studies. You instead propose something different, to make the land profitable, to make their livelihood out of their lands without selling it.
Yes. Because young people, the Constitution of Kenya has allowed young people to inherit lands from their parents and grandparents. So most of the young people would because they want quick money, they could, be given their share of the land, probably to half an acre of the land, and they decide to sell it and probably buy a car because young people want to have the nice life. So we've had that conversation with them, and we've encouraged them that if you have this particular farm with you, then you plant something or you have something that gives you money each and every day, then the money will be equivalent to what you would have done if you had sold the land. So because of course sometimes we also have people grabbing land from the young people and also from, of course, other farmers. So what we've done with the young people is we've encouraged them, if your family has this particular farm that they're not using, then you need to make use of that land. And if it is given to you legally, then you need to invest in it and not sell it out.
Okay, great. This, I think, answers a little bit to one of the points that Mr. GOERENS raised before, which is the problem of the land grabbing. So if obviously young people are more, tend more to sell rather than use the land for farming projects, is obviously much easier either for the big international companies or for the local companies just to take this land for monocultural farms. So let's now see some of the questions from Slido that I can ask to turn to my guest. We have now a question about how worried are you about countries buying land in developing countries to secure their own food requirements. Now, we're talking about land grabbing, and I think that Mrs. Ibrahim has something to say, but also Mrs. Nachilala NKOMBO, she also referred to the land grabbing and the monoculture as a main threat. Let's start with Mrs. Ibrahim.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for these questions. Of course, land grabbing is becoming a new reality for all our communities. There is 2 kinds. There is internal land grabbing and external land grabbing. Internal is those peoples who found themselves more powerful, general or ministers or whatever, who come and grab all the lands that coming around water and fertile land. And then you have the external who are coming from the outside, from the big companies who come and grab thousands and millions of hectares to grow their own food. So when they come, they used to take the community land. And I have the example around Lake Chad. When you go in Chad and you go around the Lake Chad, you see obviously by your eyes how the land are grabbed. And when they grab it, they make a big dig around the place. And then your cattle cannot pass through the dig, and all the land they grab, it is around the water, and then they do not allow the small farmers to access to this water. What we should do, I think we need a clear legislation on land tenure, where can define a land right to the communities, and then the rest of the land that the government is using. As long as we do not have a clear land tenure, we cannot secure the land from the land grabbing from internal or external peoples. That's why I did the 3D and 2D participatory mapping to resolve these issues. So we need the support to continuously work with the communities to secure their own land in order to produce our own food. And I come back to my first sentence. That's why as indigenous peoples, we always talk about food sovereignty, not food security. If you do not produce it in your place, you do not own it. And COVID gives us the concrete examples because it closed all the borders. They didn't close the shipping of the food, and the hunger become more and more in many other communities.
Thank you so much. Mrs. NKOMBO, I think you highlighted the importance of the forest, which is everything for local communities. What's going on with the forest in Zambia?
Zambia is the top #1 deforester in Africa. We are losing close to 300,000 hectares a year of forest cover. This is a very big deal because it contributes not only to stabilizing the climate, but also to sort of communities losing control of their natural resources. I mean, the forest is important because it's a pharmacy for most local communities. Local communities, as mentioned by FAO, Jocelyn, is that they are able to harvest a number of superfoods from the forest, okay? So why deplete a forest and plant an orchard when you're going to get twice as much vitamin C from moringa, from baobab, and these other options? So there's an urgent need for African countries to arrest deforestation. Luckily, a number of African countries have joined the Bone Challenge, which is to restore millions and millions of forests that have been lost. We're working closely with communities to help them get involved in the management and governance of community forestry. Luckily, our government has introduced legislation that empowers communities to track activities that include illegal logging and excessive harvesting of trees within the local area. So it comes back to defining food security from the landscape basis. I like the ideas from Chad because it's really about mapping the different resources that are in there and looking at how these resources can be managed more sustainably. I mean, forests are important. We can't have water security, and we're losing water security for some communities because forests have been cut at water recharge points. And so the importance of farming with the biodiversity really emphasizes the point that it is imperative for our agriculture system, our food systems, not to undermine the foundation for food production, which are healthy ecosystems. And when we're talking about ecosystems, we're not just talking about the land. There has to be better and stronger and more organized land use plans in different African countries or parts of the world. That we need to protect habitat, not only for land culture, but to make sure that wildlife as well are not inconvenienced. We're not cultivating in wildlife corridors or habitats. Luckily, at the community level, in areas where WWF is working, we've successfully partnered with communities, and now they are the protectors of the wildlife corridors. We know we need healthy habitats because we need a home for birds and different organisms that support pollination and other food production. So if we just think of agriculture as using land and not really looking at the quality of the soil and the land, then we're planting the seeds through the current agriculture practices for a food security disaster in the future.
Thank you. And Sherine, if you're there, maybe you coming back with us in a few seconds. No, oh, it's okay. So maybe I can now ask our guest to explain the one thing we should take away from this panel in less than 1 minute. Let's maybe start with Jocelyn.
That's an enormous question for 1 minute. One is, I think that we've touched on some incredibly important topics and we've highlighted them. The importance of Indigenous peoples and food, the importance of local communities being involved in their land, the importance of data around that land. Ms. NKOMBO was really brought up a good point about in many places due to changing colonies and changing peoples and former colonization, people don't necessarily know where their land is, and that is an enormous issue, and it's one fraught with a lot of emotion as well, and I want to acknowledge that. Bringing women and children into the conversation, making sure that small producer organizations have a say on their land. That's an incredibly important part of the solution-oriented. So it's a vast array, and I guess I would say my final point is there's no silver bullet. We have to work on all of these fronts together to ensure that we can achieve food security for all of the world, those who don't have food that are available and also those who don't have healthy food that is available.
I think that I really liked your metaphor about the Silicon Valley of agriculture in Africa. This like kind of think tank where we can have the opportunity to experiment about new technologies and ideas, like also allowing ourselves to fail, but at least to try and to find innovative ways. Sherine, you're back with us, and I think it would be nice to hear from you about the innovative ideas that you had. You have lots of ideas, and one of these is about digital agriculture. So if you can explain what is it? You there? You're not? Maybe there is a problem with the connection. Sherine, can you hear us?
I'm here.
Oh, fantastic. Yes. Okay, you have 1 minute.
Okay, we are looking forward to, as young people, we're looking forward to having the soil. The first thing that we're thinking of having is having the soil testing, portable soil testing equipment, where we don't need our farmers to keep waiting for them to submit their soil samples to the government soil testing places. So that will come a long way in helping us, not be passed with, especially with the change in climate change. Another thing that we're looking forward to having, which we are currently working on, is an application where we will have all the young people have access to this application and have agricultural experts train them on how they can, be small farmers or big farmers, even without having the expertise of being or studying a degree in agriculture and biotechnology. So we're going to have sections where we're going to tell the young people what to plant, how to plant, and what time to do that. And at the same time, we're going to teach them on the effects of climate change. This is going to help us a long way in having more young people embrace agriculture, because with the expertise that they have in technology, this is going to help them in, having an interest in wanting to be farmers, and also just more than farmers, having that conversation.
Of course. And Mrs. Ibrahim, 1 minute.
So 3 key points. Firstly, indigenous peoples occupy a quarter of all the world's land. And it is very important, because I call to all developing countries' leaders to put environment in the core of all the action on the recovery, because agroecology should be one of the components of the Green Deal who can help us sustain the food. Secondly, indigenous people's knowledge and practices are so important to restore and protect our land. So I think it is time to the international communities, and especially the European development, to at least commit $1 billion to indigenous peoples-led solutions. And lastly, it is essential that all the countries, from developed and developing countries, and big companies recognize and respect the land right of indigenous peoples to produce better food for all of us. We are here, we are ready, and hope that you are all ready to protect our food system.
Thank you so much. I think Mr. GOERENS will take this input from Mrs. Ibrahim, if you have something to say.
Oui, j'étais impressionné par la force des propos véhiculés par les 4 femmes qui se sont exprimées devant nous. C'est une leçon de vie que vous donnez à nous tous. Le land grabbing a été un sujet bien choisi parce qu'il tombe à point. Vous avez des problèmes, nous avons des problèmes. Les solutions sont là, elles sont rarement utilisées, hélas. Je crois que pour couper court à cette thématique et pour qu'elle ne nous occupe plus au-delà des années 2030, il faudrait que les gouvernements prennent leurs responsabilités. Un gouvernement peut interdire à une société extérieure d'acheter des terres. Un gouvernement peut interdire à un État étranger, un État tiers, de faire le land grabbing chez lui. Le droit des communautés est un droit qui est antérieur au droit que nous connaissons aujourd'hui. Il est ancestral. C'est un droit qui est antérieur à l'écriture même. Alors si c'est un droit de la communauté, il faut le lui laisser. Et il faut essayer de le codifier en droit national, disant voilà, il y a des communautés qui ont acquis des droits, on ne va pas les remettre en question, on va le consolider. Dernier point, je crois que cette discussion a montré aussi à quel point il est hasardeux de se limiter à 2 sujets très concrets, le land grabbing et l'accès au crédit. Parce que très vite, on déborde. On voit que ça dépend de la politique, ça dépend des acteurs, ça dépend du niveau d'éducation, ça dépend des relations extérieures. Et je crois que nous avons tous à cœur, en ce début de programmation de la politique européenne, de faire en sorte que nous soyons en phase avec ce que vous venez de dire. J'espère que ce que vous avez dit sera écrit et que nous pourrions le présenter en caractère gras à nos collègues de la Commission du développement au Parlement européen. Merci.
This is a great idea. And now, Mrs. NKOMBO, this is your minute. Go ahead.
To say to all of us on the panel and in the audience that we cannot be complacent anymore. We really need to take action in terms of...
We have problem with the audio. Could you repeat, please?
I was saying we cannot be complacent. We cannot be complacent with the current food system. The current food system is failing us, and we need to take bold action before the agro-ecosystems reach a breaking point. So we know what works. And I think our policymakers globally have a chance to do what must be done to scale up successful agroecological approaches. Also, it's crucially important that going forward, we must broaden our definition of food security and really making sure that we're delivering food and nutrition security without undermining biodiversity. Like I said, there's a lot of food options that forests do offer. There's fisheries, there's crop production. So we need to really look at both quantity and quality going forward. Lastly, but not the least, I think...
Maybe we're running out of time, but all your inputs are very welcome also for the discussion. I think I have now to give the floor to Mr. Tarabella for the final remarks. You have 1 minute and a half.
Merci, je vais essayer de faire en 1 minute et demie, respecter d'abord, et comme l'a dit mon excellent ami Charles GOERENS, c'est vrai que vos témoignages sont une source pour nous, plus que d'inspiration, mais peuvent et vont inspirer nos actions. 2 choses, au-delà de ce qu'il a dit très correctement, les autorités nationales des différents pays où les problèmes surviennent le plus gravement sont d'abord aussi responsables et avant tout responsables. Et c'est vrai qu'on peut aider au processus d'amélioration. Je prends 2 exemples sur lesquels nous travaillons et nous allons travailler. Un, c'est la due diligence, la responsabilité des entreprises. Nous venons de travailler dessus, nous attendons la proposition législative, donc il s'agit de travailler sur le comportement de nos entreprises, notamment européennes, notamment agroalimentaires, dans leur comportement qu'ils ont dans les pays extérieurs à l'Union européenne. Et donc là, nous avons une marge de manœuvre de manière à essayer de inviter à contrecarrer tous les phénomènes dont on vient de parler, la déforestation, le land grabbing, l'accaparement des terres, mais aussi les atteintes aux droits humains, aux droits de l'homme, à l'environnement. Et on pourra ainsi essayer d'encourager, grâce à une loi qui devrait être proposée, normalement, on l'attendait pour le mois de juin, elle devrait être proposée à la rentrée du mois de septembre par le commissaire Reinders, le commissaire chargé des lois, et pour aussi encourager des pratiques plus vertueuses de production alimentaire et de commerce. Et le deuxième volet d'action, Farm to Fork, on en a parlé. Et moi j'ai un rêve dans cette Farm to Fork et un souhait très fort, c'est qu'elle s'applique bien sûr au niveau européen, mais aussi qu'on l'applique au niveau extérieur, c'est qu'on mette plus de cohérence entre certaines politiques, je vais en citer 5, que ce soit la politique agricole, de développement, de commerce, d'environnement et des droits humains. Faire en sorte que plus aucune décision ne puisse se prendre si une des autres politiques n'est pas du tout respectée, voire est bafouée. Et je crois que là, on aura effectivement fait du concret. On va continuer le travail ensemble. Merci pour cette en tout cas, introduction de journée très enrichissante pour nous au niveau informatif.
Thank you so much. And we'll keep talking about famine, drought and climate change, but we also know that solutions can be found. And it was great to hear from our panelists examples of good practices and innovation. Thanks so much for being with us and have a good day.